The Sims development team announced earlier today that The Sims will be integrated into Amazon Alexa devices as the Sims Alexa SKU and is scheduled to launch next week. This new feature is pretty neat, and is another example of how developers see continuing trend of integrating software into their games that enable Alexa skill, voice, activated eye, into activity in different ways. The announcement was made during the Maxis monthly live stream, which gives players a sneak peek into future content for the game. The software is slated to allow players to play Sims trivia, listen to Sims music, and learn more about the franchise through Alexa. A community manager for The Sims has clarified a few points regarding the new software, saying that it will be released for free worldwide, but not for all languages, next week, and that this is a passion project of a few developers on the team. This is in response to some backlash the Sims team has received from players voicing their concerns about The Sims 4. It's worth pointing out that harassing developers over their work is not a good way to engage with them when asking questions about content. The development of this does not take away from development for The Sims 4. The dev continues. If the devs did not create this, it does not mean you would have gotten something else for TS4. The FBI announced earlier today that it took action against the 15 domains that reportedly helped take down other people's websites, game servers, and other online services through distributed denial of service DDoS attacks. This is pretty notable, as the holiday season tends to be plagued by DDoS attacks. At least according to the FBI, successful DDoS attacks have been known to take down game servers like Blizzard's Battle.net in the past, so devs should be mindful of that in the future. As reported by Kotaku, the FBI seized 15 websites that allow anybody with Bitcoin or a credit card in exchange for overwhelming a server with requests. Domains yesterday including criticalboot.com, regibutor.com, Downtime.org, and Quantumstress.net. Because booters provide less powerful DDoS attacks in exchange for little money, they have gone largely unnoticed since they tend to be marketed as stress testers, designed to help people test a server's capacities for withstanding such attacks. According to the FBI, these services are easy to find and a low barrier to entry for users looking to engage in cybercriminal activity. These services offered easy access to a tech infrastructure, payment options that included Bitcoin, and were relatively low cost. Reads the press release issued by the FBI. Each of the services was tested by the FBI, which verified those DDoS attack services offered through each of the seized websites. While testing the various services, the FBI determined that these types of services can have caused disruptions of networks at all levels. This was originally published here. Are you looking for inverse dynamics in Unity? Unity's physics engine, physics. It does not exist as far as I can tell, but it does exist for other physics engines, such as Bullet and possibly Open Dynamics engine. Luckily, inverse dynamics is not too hard to implement in Unity. Unity does have an inverse kinematics feature, but that only helps you with kinematic motion, and not with physical-based motion. You do not want your humanoid character to just move. You also want him to move realistically. That's where inverse dynamics comes in. Before we dive into the implementation details, you can find an overview of inverse dynamics, an overview of inverse kinematics, in this article. First, we will go over an abstract algorithm, so you understand the high-level procedures to implement the inverse dynamics algorithm. Then, we will go over the actual equations you need to implement the algorithm. Finally, we will go over the base cases necessary for this recursive algorithm. The ultimate output of inverse dynamics are the forces and torques of the rigid body required to make a movement, with the inputs being the orientations, angular velocity, and angular acceleration at each joint. One algorithm to achieve this output requires a forward iteration from the root link to the final output link, and then a backward iteration from that final output link back to the root link. It is called the recursive Newton-Euler algorithm, RNE. It was developed by Walker and Paul in 1980, and it continues to be championed to this day by other researchers, such as Featherstone and Motic. The first part iterates from the root limb to the final limb. For each limb, it computes the angular velocity and angular acceleration of the limb. The computation for the angular velocity and angular acceleration of each limb is based on the angular velocity and angular acceleration from its inboard neighbor limb. For each limb, it computes the linear acceleration at the inboard joint. Computing the linear acceleration at the joint is based on the angular velocity and linear velocity from its inboard neighbor limb. This process of computing angular and linear velocities accelerations for each limb, from the root limb to a final limb, is called velocity acceleration propagation. This is because each velocity acceleration is based on the velocity acceleration from the neighboring inboard limb. In other words, the previous limb. The rest of the computations for each limb are based on the limb's own angular velocity, angular acceleration, and linear acceleration at the joint. For each limb, it computes the linear acceleration at the limb center of mass. For each limb, it computes the internal forces for each limb. For each limb, it computes the internal torques for each limb. The second part iterates from the final limb to the root limb. For each limb, it computes the joint force based on the joint force from its outboard neighbor limb. For each limb, it computes the joint torque based on the joint torque from its outboard neighbor limb. The second part is much simpler than the first part. As you can see, you might have noticed that each computation in the pseudocode above is abstracted by a function. Luckily, each of those functions is merely a one-liner equation. That said, each one-liner of code is packed with mathematical cross products, derivatives, and notations. We will explain all of the math in the next article, coming soon, if you are interested. But for those that are fine with the plug-and-chug algorithm, this article provides the pseudocode for inverse dynamics with all the required math equations. First, here are some definitions and figures. If some of the prefix and postfix notations did not make sense, here is a diagram to help clarify. With that in mind, we move on to the actual algorithm. That's the Newton-Euler method. Part 1 iterates forwards from the root limb. Part 2 iterates backward from the final limb. This is a recursive method, but as you can see, it does not need to be implemented recursively. It is called recursive because most computations rely on the value s from its inboard-outboard neighboring limb. However, it is useful to implement inverse dynamics recursively when an inboard link is connected to multiple outboard links. In other words, a parent has multiple children, such as a common tree structure. Otherwise, if it is just one, then you have more of a linked list structure without need for recursion. Being that this is a recursive algorithm, we will need base cases for part 1 and part 2. For part 1, note that the root limb does not have an inboard neighboring limb. Therefore, we can just treat any value, such as acceleration, angular velocity, or angular acceleration, of this non-existent limb as 0. However, if you d like to include gravitational forces in your inverse dynamics algorithm, then you can set the acceleration for this non-existent limb to the gravitational constant of your choice.
G 9 81米每秒。
For part 2, note that the final limb does not have an outboard neighboring limb. Therefore, we can just treat any value, such as force or torque, for this non-existent limb as 0. However, if the articulated body is not moving in free space, and it is in contact with the environment,
G
the foot is on the ground,